Hi, I'm Marcus with the IndieMusicLab.com, so let's talk about mixing your vocals. Now, with every song I mix, and the more I mix my own music, the more I realize there is a structure, there are these common threads that run through 95 to 99% of my vocal mixes. And I've realized that there is a 4-step system, you could think of it also as 4 phases to getting a polished vocal mix. So that is what I'm going to share with you today. So if you're finally ready to say goodbye to beginner and even intermediate sounding vocal mixes, and you want to churn out a polished, beautiful sounding vocal mix every time, then this is where you need to start. The 4 phases to achieving a polished vocal mix. So let's dive right in. Now, these phases are things that you've probably heard of before. You know what they are, but hopefully this video will help glue everything together to help give you an understanding and a holistic view of, oh, this is how everything works together, right? So, phase 1 on your way to a polished vocal mix is compression. Very simple, right? Although it might not be as simple or as basic as you think it is. So this is the song that I'm going to be just walking you through all of these phases. This is a remake that I threw together of Porch's song Back to School, and it sounds like this.
I post what I did going back to school. I got a new friend and they think I'm cool.
So that's the song I'm using today. Now let's dive in and let's focus on these phases, on these steps, and how did I go about this process. So here is my lead vocals chain. Now I have a bit of tuning on the lead vocal track, and then I'm sending the lead vocal track to this lead vox bus right here. So this is where everything is happening. The first plugin on this chain, let me turn everything off, is compression, but it's not what you think. This is actually a de-esser. Now this is still phase 1. A de-esser, in case you didn't know this, is just a form of compression. It's like a filtered form of compression. So what a de-esser does is, instead of compressing the entire EQ spectrum of your vocal, it only de-esses from like 5K and up. So it listens for the 5 to 10K range, and then when those harsh S's pop through, it shoots them down, but it doesn't affect the rest of the frequency spectrum. So that is what a de-esser does. Now you can use like a stock compressor like I'm doing here, or you can just use any de-esser that you might have inside of your DAW. It doesn't matter, just whatever de-esser you happen to have, go for that. As you can see, it's de-essing here. And it's because I'm using this filter option over here, it's creating the de-esser settings there. Now next is my 3-step compression system. So if you've watched any of my videos, you've seen me explain this, where I'll stack 3 compressors back to back to back, and I call them the balance compressor, the glue compressor, and the punch compressor. So the first compressor here is the balance compressor. By the way, if you want to learn more about this 3-step compression system, just be sure to download my Indie Vocals compression guide. I'll leave a link in the description below. So this is the balance compressor. You have fast attack, fast release. This is just to shoot down the loud parts, right? Because when you shoot down the loud parts and you raise the overall volume, then instead of the dynamics being from loudest here to quietest here, it's now, since you've turned down the loud parts with this balance compressor, and then you turn up the overall volume, there's less variation. So then you have a more evenly balanced vocal volume. So that's the first compressor. Fast attack, fast release, it's just for balance. The second compressor is a glue compressor. So this is where we start to affect the sound. So you want medium attack, medium release, and you can then figure out the rest from there. You can use any compressor that you might have. This is just to start adding some glue to your track. Medium attack, again, medium release. And then I did an interesting thing here that I learned from Joe Gilder over at the Home Studio Corner, where I turn the threshold all the way down and slowly bring the ratio up until it starts to compress around 3 dB or so on the gain reduction. But you can use any type of compressor. You can use vintage compressors, stock compressors, anything just to give your vocal a bit of glue. And then thirdly is the punch compressor. So this third one, I just grabbed this compressor here inside of the Fat channel in Studio One, and this is like a fast attack compressor by nature anyway, so it's a fast attack, medium release, and then I just love the way that this compressor sounds. So you can experiment with any compressors you have, and just find one that gives you a really nice punchy sound to your vocals. Right, so it did add some volume, but okay, so here's without all of those compressors on, including the de-esser and then the three stacked compressors, and then I'll turn it on. There's without them. So with all those compressors added, it brings the vocal to the front of the mix, it gives it that glue, and it feels like, oh, we're on our way now to a polished vocal mix. So that is phase one. Get the compression right, and you can do this, by the way, before you add any EQ, unless your vocal EQ does have a drastic problem. If there's a big problem with the vocal EQ when it's dry, with maybe the way that it was recorded, then you do want to first put an EQ on it to fix that. But for the most part, I do like the sound of putting compression on your vocal first before you add EQ. And speaking of EQ, that is phase two in this process. Now, EQ is very simple. We're just starting, I mean, it's simple in theory, but it can be difficult to figure out, right? Which is why I have my free visual guide for fixing vocal EQ problems. I'll also leave a link to that down below for you to check out. But in this case, what I did here is just a couple moves in like the nasal zones between 1K and 2K. Because, and this is just with my voice in particular, around 2K, there's often too much of it. Right, it's that range. Now let's just bring that down. It warms it up, it puts a bit of a blanket over it, and I just like the way it sounds. And then I also made a narrow cut here, and this is just based on what I was hearing. I thought there was a bit of that honkiness in this range. That's the frequency that I just wanted to turn down a bit. And then also have just a slight wider cut here in the low mid range. That range. Just to clean up this vocal mix a little bit, and then that's it. And then you just have this as well, just to clean up the very bottom end of the vocal chain. So let's see if I did anything else with EQ. I did not. So that's the only EQ that I have on this vocal in particular. So that is phase two. Phase one is compression, phase two is EQ, and then phase three is saturation and or distortion. So there are lots of plugins you can add to your session, to your vocal, that can add saturation. One in particular is the plugin Sausage Fattener, and I love adding this, especially the color knob for vocals. Fatness can sound great too, and I tend to use the fatness knob on like kick drums or bass, that type of thing. But listen to what this sounds like when with this color knob turned on this vocal. Just without it. Just with it. It just brightens it up. And it brightens it up with an EQ boost that is more saturated. Because when you make a boost on an EQ, it's going to sound cleaner. It's going to sound less analog, if you will. Versus if you think about adding EQ and boosting EQs using saturation plugins, you get a much more colorful tone that way. And that's why I love to, especially for the high end from like 5K and up, if I want to make my vocals brighter, I much prefer to use saturation plugins to make that happen than to just boost a stock EQ. So that is what I did here. I just blasted or I boosted this color knob on this plugin, and it gave me that extra brightness. And then I did turn the fatness up just a little bit to add some extra beefiness in the low end. Here's without it. Let's come over here. There's without it. There's with it. As you can hear, it's starting to add just a little bit of grit, especially on the edges. It's just starting to make this overall mix feel a bit more polished. So that's the first saturation plugin that I'm adding there. And then I'm also adding a red light distortion plugin. So this is a stock distortion in Studio One, and it sounds fantastic. So now you want to be careful when you're adding distortions, especially because they can overwhelm your mix fairly quickly. So you want to make sure that you're actually achieving the sound that you want when you're adding a distortion. So that's why, as you can see here, the mix knob is all the way down at only 8.5%.
I post what I did.
Here's without it.
Going back to school. I
with
got a new friend.
Again, it's pretty subtle, but it's adding just that little bit of grit, that crunch to this vocal. Now, I did automate this mix knob as well, though. So when we come over here, this mix knob now is up at 15%, so there's more of it. Let's see where we're at here.
Climbed into your car and you drove us away.
Right, so if we turn it up, that's what it would
'Cause
sound like.
I'm going back.
So those are the two plugins I added, Sausage Fatter and just a stock plugin, distortion plugin in Studio One, to help add some edginess, some grit, and some crunch to this vocal, and that is helping to polish up the sound and make it ready to be mastered and uploaded to Spotify, right? So those are the first three phases. Now let's go to phase 4, which is time-based effects. So time-based effects are anything like reverbs, delays. Those are the two that we're going to be talking about here, although we're also going to talk about a little bit how I used a doubler in this vocal mix as well. But let's start with the reverb. So a reverb, it's not, you don't hear it that much, but it is.
Ooh, I got a new friend.
Here's what it sounds
and
like.
they think I'm cool.
It's a very simple basic plate reverb. I'm just using Valhalla Vintage Reverb. You can use any reverb you might have inside of your DAW. And it's a fairly short, just over 1 second. Yeah, it's nothing crazy happening there. And then I do have an EQ on this reverb channel, which this is a return track, right? So I'm setting this up on a return track, or as they're known as effects channels in Studio One. You can do this in any DAW. Every DAW you can add return tracks to put reverbs and delays on. And I've got the low cut and the high cut, so it gives it that warm, blanketed reverb sound, so it's not too bright. And then next is I'm also sending this vocal to a delay, which I also have set up on another return track over here. And this is Valhalla Delay. This is a dotted eighth note. And yeah, it's just pretty straightforward. I've got it on lo-fi mode, which sounds amazing. And again, I made it very warm. So with the high cut here inside of Valhalla Delay, I turn this all the way down to like 2K. So it's giving it this type of blanketed sound. And then I also do have a reverb after this delay. That way that delay signal becomes less dry and actually washes out that delay signal a little bit. But let's listen to what this delay sounds like.
Climbed into your car and you drove us
It's very warm. It's because I filtered it out.
I'm going back.
Yeah, so we're just adding one reverb, we're adding one delay, and then there's one more thing that we're adding here. Which is, I'm not sure if this would be classified as a time-based effect, but in any case, I do have it set up on a return track, and that is a doubler. And so this doubler is just waves doubler, and then I'm sending a little bit of the vocal through this as well. So that's why you get this sound.
Your car and you drove us
Why I'm gonna, oh, I need to turn it on over here as well, because I turned it off. Okay, so here's what that doubler sounds like if it's cranked.
away.
Right. Too much, obviously.
I'm going back to school.
Now, when you're messing with doublers, one, you need to be very careful that you don't add too much of it, then it can sound wonky. But what you can also do is automate the effect. So I went over here and I clicked this, which then pops up over here so that you hit automate, and then that opens up this automation lane. And as you can see here, see which one is it? It was, okay, this one. So over here, there's no doubler. It's all the way down at 0, so you're not hearing any doubler.
Back to school.
And then here you start to hear it a little bit because I've automated it to come in here.
On my vacation.
Right, you start to hear it. And then here at the end, I cranked it even more.
Climbed into
Right, so you start to hear that a little bit.
and you drove us away. 'Cause I'm going back to school.
And that is it, my friend. Those are the 4 steps, the 4 phases to achieving a polished vocal mix. Now, if you want to dive deeper into understanding especially EQ and compression, which are the most important phases, that's phase 1 and 2, then I have 2 free guides that I'll link to below. It's my visual guide for fixing vocal EQ problems, as well as my indie vocals compression guide. Those are going to help you out tremendously to just gain some clarity and get an understanding of how to use EQ and compression effectively on your vocals. So that is it for today's video, my friend. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.
I post what I